The twins were coming tonight. Arathorn pressed her back against the frozen bark of the old hemlock tree, her breath coming in white clouds that disappeared into the darkness around her. The Appalachian Ridge stretched out in every direction, buried under snow that fell thick and fast, erasing the world one flake at a time. This was the worst winter storm West Virginia had seen in 40 years. The kind of storm that made the evening news in cities 3 states away. The kind that killed people who weren't prepared. Era was not prepared. The outer cabin where the council had placed her 3 weeks ago had collapsed 2 hours earlier. She'd heard it go a crack like a rifle shot, then a groan of timber, giving way under the weight of 4 feet of snow. She'd been inside when the roof beam split, had maybe 30 seconds to grab what she could carry and get out before the whole structure came down. She'd grabbed nothing. There was nothing worth grabbing. Just walked out into the storm with the clothes on her back and the 2 lives inside her body that had been trying to come into the world for the past 6 hours. She'd walked because staying meant dying under collapsed timber. Walked because somewhere in her mind she remembered these trees, the old growth grove a quarter-mile north of the settlement. Her mother had shown her once years ago before the sickness took her. Told her the trees there grew so close together that the wind couldn't fully reach between them. That if you were ever lost in winter, you went to the old trees. They'd keep you alive if you were smart, if you were lucky. Era had walked that quarter-mile, had crawled the last 100 yards when her legs stopped working the way legs were supposed to work. Now she sat with her back against the hemlock knees, bent hands gripping the bark above her head, and felt her body doing something that her mind couldn't quite process. Something inevitable and terrifying and utterly beyond her control. The babies were coming. Here. Now. In 20-degree cold with no fire and no help and no way to stop what had already started. She'd known this moment would arrive eventually. Had known it since the morning sickness started 4 months back. Had known it when her belly began to swell and the loose wrappings of hide she wore couldn't hide it anymore. Had known it when Elder Drummond's wife spotted her at the creek and went straight to the council with the news that Arathorn was carrying without bond, without ceremony, without the blessing of the community or the acknowledgement of any man. She'd known the council would call her before them, that they'd ask who the father was. That when she said she didn't know his full name, only that he'd been a drifter passing through a man with kind eyes and gentle hands who'd shared her fire for one night 6 months ago and left before dawn, they would look at her the way you look at something contaminated, impure Gareth Drummond had said. Standing at the center of the communal circle with the entire settlement gathered around the fire, his voice measured and certain. A woman who carries life outside the sacred bond brings impurity to the bloodline. She has forfeited her place among us until the council decides what becomes of her and the life she carries. They hadn't cast her out entirely. That would have been a death sentence, and even Gareth Drummond wasn't prepared to stand before whatever God he prayed to with that particular choice on his conscience. But they'd moved her. Taken her from the small but solid cabin she'd occupied near the center of Draven Hollow and placed her in the outer structure. The one that sat at the very edge of the settlement boundary, the one with gaps in the walls wide enough to see through, the one that everyone knew was meant for storage, not living. That had been 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of waking to frost on the inside of the walls. 3 weeks of walking to the creek for water because no one would bring it to her. 3 weeks of silence from a community that had never been warm to her, but had at least acknowledged her existence. She'd survived those 3 weeks. Would have survived longer if the storm hadn't come. If the cabin hadn't collapsed, if her body hadn't decided that tonight of all nights was the night these babies had waited long enough. Another contraction rolled through her, deeper this time, longer. She bit down on the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste blood because making sound felt dangerous. Like if she started, she wouldn't be able to stop. Like screaming into the storm would use up something she needed to save. The wind howled through the trees above her. Snow piled against her legs. She could feel the cold working its way through her clothes, through her skin reaching for the core of her, the part that still held warmth. She thought about her mother, dead 21 years now. Wondered if her mother had been this afraid the night Era was born. Wondered if fear was something that came with the territory of bringing life into a world that had never promised to be kind. She thought about the drifter, Jorah he'd said his name was, or maybe Jonah. The storm had been loud that night, too rain instead of snow, but loud enough that she'd barely heard him. He'd been walking the ridge trail in the dark. Had seen her fire through the trees and called out asking if he could sit by it for a spell. Get warm before moving on. She'd said yes because she'd been gathering firewood alone that day and the night had come on fast and cold and company. Even a stranger's company felt safer than sitting alone in the dark. They talked, not much, but enough that she'd learned he was from somewhere south, Tennessee maybe, heading north looking for work. He'd been polite, hadn't stared at her the way some men did, hadn't asked questions that weren't his business to ask. When the rain got worse, she'd offered him a space under her shelter, just a lean-to. Nothing improper about it. But somewhere in the night in the dark, in the warmth of two bodies sharing heat against the cold, something had shifted. She'd reach for him, or he'd reach for her. It didn't matter who reached first. What mattered was that it had felt like a choice, like something she wanted, not something taken from her owner. He'd been gone before sunrise, left a bundle of dried venison wrapped in cloth and a carved wooden button sitting on a stone near the cold fire. She'd kept the button, hadn't known why at the time, just kept it. She thought about that button now. It was back in the collapsed cabin, buried under snow and timber, along with everything else she'd owned, which wasn't much. 28 years of life in Draven Hollow, and everything she'd accumulated could fit in a pack small enough to carry with one hand. Another contraction, stronger than the last. Close enough now that she could feel them building one on top of another like waves hitting a shore. Her body had its own rhythm, its own plan. It didn't care that there was no midwife here, no boiled water or clean cloth or steady hands to help. Her body was doing this, with or without permission. With or without help, she thought maybe she should pray. Gareth Drummond prayed before every council meeting, long prayers about tradition and purity and the old ways. Prayers that seemed designed to remind everyone that he had a direct line to something holy, and they did not. Era had never been much for praying. Praying felt like asking for help from something that had never shown much interest in helping her. But maybe tonight was different. Maybe tonight she should ask, just in case someone was listening. She opened her mouth, tried to form words, couldn't. Her throat was too tight, her mind too fractured. Instead, she pressed her forehead against the rough bark of the tree and thought four words over and over like a mantra. Keep them alive. Keep them alive. Keep them alive. Not her. She didn't ask to be kept alive. That felt like too much to ask for. But the babies, they hadn't done anything wrong, hadn't chosen this. They deserved a chance. Even if she didn't make it, even if this was where her story ended, they deserved a chance. The contraction peaked and held, and she felt something shift inside her. Something fundamental. The beginning of the end or the end of the beginning. She didn't know which. Didn't matter. This was happening. She was alone. And then she heard footsteps. Not the quick, panicked footsteps of someone lost in a storm. Not the stumbling steps of someone who'd wandered off the trail and couldn't find their way back. These steps were slow, deliberate, heavy enough that she could hear them over the wind, heavy enough that they pressed deep into the snow and kept coming. Someone was out here. Era kept her eyes closed, kept her hands gripped tight on the bark above her. If this was someone from Draven Hollow, if Gareth had sent someone to check on her, or worse, to finish what the storm had started, then she had no strength to fight. No energy left for anything except the work her body was already doing. She'd survived this long by being invisible, by keeping quiet, by not drawing attention. But tonight there was no hiding. Tonight she was exactly where she was, doing exactly what she was doing. If they wanted to take that from her, they'd have to do it while she was still breathing. The footsteps stopped. Close, maybe 10 feet away, maybe less. She could feel the presence of another person the way you feel a shift in air pressure before a storm breaks. She opened her eyes. Through the falling snow, she saw him. Large, taller than any man from Draven Hollow. Broader across the shoulders than seemed natural. He wore a heavy coat dark against the white and moved with the kind of certainty that came from someone who'd spent their whole life in these mountains and knew them the way other people knew their own hands. He stopped when he saw her, didn't move closer, just stood there in the snow 10 feet from her tree and looked at her. Not with pity, not with disgust, just looked, assessing, taking in the situation with the same kind of calm attention you'd use looking at a map, trying to figure out where you were and what came next. Era stared back. She had nothing to hide now, nothing left to protect except the two lives inside her that were coming whether this stranger stayed or went. He took one step closer, then another. Slow, giving her time to object if she was going to. She didn't object. She watched him come. When he was close enough that she could see his face in the dim light that filtered through the storm clouds, she saw that he was older than her. Maybe late 30s. The kind of face that had seen weather and hard work and hadn't softened from either. His eyes were dark, steady. They moved from her face to her hands gripped on the bark to her body bent forward against the tree. He said one word, twins. His voice was low, rough from cold or from years of not using it more than necessary. But not unkind. Era nodded, couldn't speak. Another contraction was building, and if she opened her mouth now, she'd make sound, and she'd been holding sound back for 6 hours, and if it came out now, it would all come out. His gaze found hers for one more second. Then he unslung the pack from his shoulders and dropped it in the snow. All right, he said, calm, like this was just another thing that needed doing. We're doing this. He moved fast after that, not panicked fast, efficient fast. The kind of fast that came from someone who dealt with emergencies before and knew that wasting motion, wasted time, and time was the only thing that mattered. He pulled a small folding saw from his pack, walked to the nearest dead tree, she hadn't even noticed it in the dark, and cut 3 branches in under a minute, brought them back, arranged them in a triangle, pulled a fire starter from his coat pocket, struck it once, twice. Third time the spark caught on a handful of dry bark he'd scraped from inside his coat. The fire was small at first, just an orange glow barely visible through the snow, but he fed it carefully, one twig at a time, then larger sticks, then the branches. Within 5 minutes there was real heat, real light. Era felt the warmth hit her face and a weight lifted from her shoulders. Not the fear. The fear was still there, but the certainty of death that had loosened its grip. Just slightly. Just enough. The man moved around the fire to her side, knelt in the snow, pulled his coat off and wrapped it around her shoulders and over her legs. It was heavy, warm from his body, smelled like wood smoke and leather and something else she couldn't name. He looked at her face again. How far apart? She understood the question. 3 minutes, maybe less. He nodded, opened his pack, pulled out what looked like a medical kit, small but organized, bandages, gauze, something in a metal tin, a bottle of clear liquid. I'm going to help you, he said. A statement, not a question. You understand? She nodded. All right, when the next one comes, don't hold your breath. Breathe out slow, like you're blowing out a candle. Can you do that? She nodded again. Good. He positioned himself across from her, close enough to reach her, but not crowding. The fire burned between them, small but steady. The snow kept falling, but the old hemlock's branches caught most of it. This small space, maybe 6 feet across, was almost dry, almost warm. The next contraction hit. Era tried to do what he'd said. Breathe out slow. It felt wrong. Every instinct told her to hold her breath, to bear down, to fight against it. But she tried. Breathe it out. Slow, like blowing out a candle. Good, he said. That's good. Keep doing that. She didn't know who this man was, didn't know where he'd come from or why he was out in this storm. Didn't know if he was someone she should trust or someone she should fear. But he'd built her a fire, had given her his coat, was kneeling in the snow helping her bring 2 babies into the world without asking her name or where she came from or whether she deserved help. That had to count for something. What's your name? She managed between breaths. He didn't look up from the medical kit he was organizing. Cade Brennan. Era. All right, Era, here's what's going to happen. These babies are coming tonight. Both of them. Probably in the next hour. Maybe less. I've done this before. Not often, but enough to know what needs doing. So you're going to listen to me, and you're going to do what I say when I say it, and we're going to get through this. Understand? His voice had changed. His voice firmed without becoming harsh. The voice of someone who needed her to believe what he was saying, because if she didn't believe it, if she gave up now, then none of this worked. I understand. Good. The contractions came faster after that, closer together, each one stronger than the last. Era lost track of time, lost track of everything except Cade's voice telling her when to breathe, when to push, when to wait. He didn't waste words, didn't try to comfort her with empty promises that everything would be fine, just gave her instructions. Clear, direct, one thing at a time. The fire burned, the snow fell, and somewhere in that small circle of warmth and light, something impossible started to happen. The first baby came at what Cade said was 40 minutes past when he'd found her. Could have been longer, could have been shorter. Time had stopped meaning anything. What Era remembered was the moment of release, the moment when something that had been inside her for 9 months was suddenly outside, in the world, separate. She heard the cry before she saw anything, high and sharp and furious. The sound of something alive that hadn't asked to be alive, but was going to be anyway. Cade moved fast, caught the baby, wrapped it in something looked like a flannel shirt he'd pulled from his pack, worked over it for maybe 10 seconds, checking, making sure. Then he brought it to her. "Girl," he said, breathing good, strong. He placed the bundle against Era's chest. She brought her arms around it automatically. The baby was tiny, impossibly tiny, but solid, real, warm. The crying stopped. Or maybe didn't stop, but changed, became quieter. More of a complaint than a scream. Era looked down at the small red face pressed against her, at the eyes that hadn't opened yet but would, at the tiny fists that were already pushing against the cloth wrapped around them. "One down," Cade said. His voice was still steady, but there was something else in it now, relief perhaps. "Stay with me. We're not done yet." The second baby took longer. 15 minutes, Cade said later. But it felt like hours to Era. Felt like her body had given everything it had for the first one and had nothing left for the second. She was wrong. Her body had more. It found it, pulled it up from somewhere deep and primal and pushed. The second cry was quieter than the first. Took longer to start. Era's heart stopped in the seconds between silence and sound. Just stopped. Waited. Then she heard it. Weaker than the first, but there. Present. Cade worked over this one longer. She couldn't see what he was doing. Could only watch his hands moving his face, focused his mouth, counting something under his breath. Then he wrapped this one too. Brought it to her, placed it against her chest next to the first. "Girl," he said. "Smaller, but breathing. She's going to be fine." 2 babies. 2 daughters. Both breathing. Both alive. Era held them against her and her throat tightened with something too big for words. Too big for thought. It just was. This enormous, terrible, beautiful thing that filled every space inside her until there was nothing else. She looked at Cade across the fire. He was watching her. Not the babies. Her. "You did it," he said quietly. She couldn't speak. Could only hold her daughters and feel the snow falling around them and the fire burning, and this man, this stranger sitting across from her, like a wall between her and the rest of the winter. Cade cleaned up efficiently. Packed away the medical supplies, added more wood to the fire, pulled another coat from his pack, apparently he carried 2, and draped it over her and the babies. Made a windbreak out of branches in his tarp, positioned to keep the worst of the weather off them. When he was done, he sat back down across the fire, pulled his knees up, rested his forearms on them, looked at her. "Storm's not going to break tonight," he said. "Maybe not tomorrow. These babies can't travel in this cold, not yet. And neither can you." Era understood what he was saying without him having to say it directly. "You're staying. I'm staying." Why? It was the only question that mattered. Why would a stranger stay in a blizzard for a woman he didn't know, and 2 babies that weren't his? Cade was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Snow hissed when it hit the flames. "Because you're here," he said finally, "and I'm here." And walking away from that, he gestured to the babies against her chest, "Isn't something I can do. So I'm staying until the storm breaks and you're strong enough to move. 2 days, maybe 3. He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world, like there was no other choice that made sense. Era looked at him across the fire. This man who'd appeared in her worst moment, who'd delivered her daughters, who was now promising to stay. She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to hold something that felt too large for the space between them. So she said the only thing that felt true. "Thank you." Cade nodded once. "Get some rest. I'll keep the fire going." Era leaned back against the hemlock tree. Both babies were asleep now, their small bodies warm against hers under the layers of coat and cloth, their breathing steady and quiet. She closed her eyes. She'd been certain just hours ago that she would die tonight, that this tree would be the last thing she'd see, that the cold would take her and her babies, and that would be the end of her story. She'd been wrong. The fire burned. Cade Brennan sat watch across from her, and somewhere in the darkness of the Appalachian Ridge, in the middle of the worst storm in 40 years, 3 lives that should have been lost were instead found. The snow kept falling. The wind kept blowing. But inside this small circle of warmth, sheltered by ancient trees and tended by a stranger's steady hands, Era Thorne and her daughters survived the night. And when morning came gray and cold and showing no sign that the storm had any intention of stopping, she opened her eyes to find Cade already awake, feeding the fire, keeping watch. He looked at her across the flames. "How are they?" Era checked both babies. "Both still breathing. Both still warm. They're alive." "Good," Cade said. "That's good." He pulled something from his pack. Dried meat, divided it into portions, offered her half. She took it, ate slowly. It was tough and salty and tasted better than anything she'd eaten in weeks. "Where were you going?" she asked. "Before you found us." "Draven Hollow," Kate said. "Inspection rotation. I'm Ridge Marshal for this sector. Cover 14 communities between here and the Kentucky line." Era went still. The meat in her hand suddenly felt heavy. Ridge Marshal. She'd heard of them. Everyone in the Hollows had. They were the authority that superseded local councils. The law that applied when communities couldn't govern themselves. They came through twice a year. Made sure things were running according to the charter. Made sure no one was being abused. Made sure the old ways didn't turn into bad ways. Gareth Drummond hated them. Called them government interference. Outside authorities sticking their noses where they didn't belong. Cade Brennan was watching her face. "You're from Draven Hollow." It wasn't a question. "Yes. And they put you in a structure that collapsed in a storm while you were 38 weeks pregnant." Still not a question, just a statement, but there was something underneath it, something that sounded like anger held in check. "The council decided I wasn't fit to stay in the main settlement." "Why?" Era looked down at the babies. "I'm carrying without bond, without ceremony. The father's not from the community. The council said I brought impurity to the bloodline." Silence, long enough that Era looked up. Cade's face hadn't changed. Still calm, still measured, but his eyes had gone flat. The kind of flat that came before violence, or the kind that came after deciding violence would only make things worse and choosing restraint instead. "When the storm breaks," Kate said quietly, "I'm going to have a conversation with your council." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Era didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Just held her daughters and watched the snow fall and wondered what happened when the Ridge Marshal had a conversation with Gareth Drummond about impurity and bloodlines and women left to die in collapsed cabins. She thought maybe Gareth Drummond was about to find out. The first full day passed slowly, measured in small tasks that kept them alive. Cade built up the shelter. Not much. He didn't have materials for much, but enough. He strung his tarp between 3 trees, creating a slanted roof that caught the snow before it could reach them. He piled branches along the sides, weaving them tight enough to block the wind. By mid-morning, their small space felt almost enclosed, almost protected. The fire never went out. Every time Era woke from the shallow sleep that was all her body could manage, she found Cade feeding it, adding wood, adjusting logs, keeping the heat constant and even. He didn't talk much that first day, just worked. Moved through the tasks of survival with the same steady efficiency he'd shown the night before. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Just one thing after another until the list was done and then starting the list over again. Era watched him when she wasn't watching the babies. Tried to understand who this man was. What kind of person walked into a blizzard and stayed to help a stranger birth twins and then spent the next day building shelter and keeping fire like it was just another Tuesday? Ridge Marshal, he'd said. She'd heard stories about them. The men and occasionally women who traveled the mountain communities enforcing the charter that governed how the isolated hollows ran their business. Some people said they were necessary. Others, like Gareth Drummond, said they were an insult to tradition. Outside authority imposed by people who didn't understand the old ways. Watching Cade work, Era thought maybe the truth was simpler. Maybe Ridge Marshals were just people who decided that some things mattered more than tradition. Things like not letting pregnant women freeze to death in collapsed cabins. The babies slept most of that first day. Woke to nurse, made their small complaints, then settled back against Era's chest and slept again. She'd worried they'd be cold, that the temperature would be too much for bodies so new and small, but wrapped in Cade's coats pressed against her skin, they stayed warm, stayed alive. By afternoon of the first day, Cade had the shelter tight enough that almost no snow got through. The fire burned strong and the space around them had warmed to maybe 40 degrees. Not comfortable, but survivable. He'd also disappeared twice into the storm. The first time for maybe 20 minutes. The second time for closer to an hour. Both times he came back carrying something. The first time deadwood, enough to keep the fire going through the night. The second time a rabbit, already gutted and cleaned. He rigged a spit over the fire, cooked the meat, slowly turning it until his skin crackled, and the smell made Era's stomach clench with hunger she hadn't let herself feel. When it was done, he divided it, gave her the larger portion. "You need it more," he said when she tried to object. "You're feeding 3, she ate. The meat was tough and gamey, but it was protein and fat, and her body needed both. She ate every piece and wished there was more. Cade ate his portion more slowly, chewing carefully, making it last. When he was done, he melted snow in a metal cup over the fire. offered it to her first. Drink, you're losing water faster than you think. She drank. The water was lukewarm and tasted faintly metallic, but it cut the salt from the meat and eased the dryness in her throat. He refilled the cup, drank his own portion, then filled it again and set it aside to cool. We'll need to keep your fluids up, he said, not looking at her, looking at the fire. Next few days are going to be hard on your body. You're recovering from major trauma. Your body's trying to heal and produce milk and regulate temperature all at once. You need water, as much as you can take. Era understood he was speaking from experience, from training, from having done this before, seen it done, or learned it from someone who knew. You said you'd done this before. Delivered babies. Kate added another log to the fire. Took his time answering. Twice, he said finally. Once when I was with Mountain Rescue. Woman went into labor on a trail 3 miles from the nearest road. We got her partway down before the baby decided it wasn't waiting. Second time was a homestead up near the Virginia line. Midwife was snowed in. Baby was breech. I helped turn it. He said it matter-of-factly, like these were just things that had happened, just part of the job. Both times they lived, mother and baby. Both times they lived. Era nodded. Let that settle. 3 for 3. Better odds than she'd had any right to hope for last night. What's Mountain Rescue? Search and recovery team. Operate out of the National Forest Service. I was with them for 8 years before I took the marshal position. Why'd you leave? Cade was quiet for a moment. The fire popped. Wind moved through the trees above them, but it sounded distant now, muffled by the shelter he'd built. Got tired of searching, he said. Wanted to spend more time making sure people didn't need searching for in the first place. Era thought about that, about the difference between rescue and prevention, about a man who'd gone from pulling people out of danger to trying to stop the danger from happening at all. Does it work, prevention? Sometimes. Kate looked at her across the fire. Sometimes you still end up in the middle of a blizzard delivering twins under a hemlock tree. There was something in his voice, not quite humor, but close. The acknowledgement of irony. Era found herself almost smiling. Almost. Thank you, she said, for staying, for all of this. Cade shook his head. Don't thank me for doing what should have been done in the first place. Your counsel put you in a death trap. I just happened to be in the right place to pull you out. That's not charity. That's baseline human decency. The way he said it flat and certain made it clear this wasn't up for debate. He didn't want gratitude, didn't want to be treated like a hero. He'd done what needed doing, and that was the end of the conversation. Era settled back against the tree. Both babies were awake now, not crying, just looking around with those unfocused eyes that didn't quite see yet, but were trying, taking in light and shadow and movement, learning the world they'd been born into. She needed to name them soon. The old tradition said you didn't name a child until you were certain it would survive, until it had shown strength, proven it wanted to be here. Both her daughters had proven that already. Born in a blizzard, survived their first night in sub-freezing temperatures. They'd earned their names. The question was what to call them. She looked at the firstborn, the one who'd come out screaming, who even now was moving more than her sister, kicking small legs, pushing small fists against the blanket. Everything about her said she was here and intended to stay, and the world could adjust or get out of the way. Era thought about light, about the moment before sunrise when the sky starts to change, but the sun hasn't shown itself yet. That first hint that darkness is temporary, that something's coming. Donlin, she said quietly, testing the name in her mouth, seeing how it felt. The first one, I'm going to call her Donlin. Cade looked at the baby, nodded once. Strong name. Era looked at the second-born, smaller, quieter. She didn't move as much as her sister, but when she did move, it was deliberate, purposeful, and her eyes, dark and steady, even at a day old, seemed to take in everything and give back nothing. Era thought about water, about rivers that ran deep and quiet. That looked calm on the surface, but had currents underneath that could pull you down if you didn't respect them. About the kind of strength that didn't announce itself, just was. River, Era said. The second, river. Cade looked at the smaller baby for a long moment. His expression shifted briefly, hard to read, but approval perhaps. Good names, he said. Both of them. Names that don't ask permission. Era held both daughters against her chest. Donlin and River, her girls. Born in winter. Born in crisis. Born into a world that hadn't welcomed them and might never welcome them. But alive. And named. That felt important. Felt like drawing a line in the snow. Here they were. These two lives. They had names now. They were real in a way that made them harder to erase. The second day was colder. Era woke to find frost on the inside of the tarp. The fire had burned low, not out, but lower than it had been. Cade was already awake, feeding it back up, but the temperature had dropped during the night, and the shelter felt it. "Storm's intensifying," Cade said without looking up. "We're going to lose some heat today, but we'll manage." He said it with the same steady certainty he said everything. Not dismissing the danger, just refusing to panic about it. Era checked the babies, both still warm against her skin, both breathing steady. Donlin was awake, mouth working in that way that meant she'd want a nurse soon. River was asleep, small face peaceful. The second day was harder than the first in ways that had nothing to do with the cold. Era's body was catching up with what it had been through. Everything hurt. Her back, her legs, her abdomen. The deep pulling ache of muscles that had worked past their limits and were now demanding payment for the effort. She couldn't move much without pain, couldn't shift position without something screaming. And the babies they needed to eat every 2 hours, needed to be kept warm, needed to be held. Cade helped without being asked. When she needed to adjust, he was there to take one baby so she could move. When she needed more water, he had it ready. When she needed to sleep, really sleep, not just close her eyes for a few minutes, he took both girls and held them against his chest under his coat and kept them warm, while Era got an hour of actual rest. She woke from that hour to find him sitting cross-legged by the fire, both babies asleep against him, his large hands positioned carefully to support their small heads. He was looking down at them with an expression she couldn't quite read, serious, focused, like he was memorizing something important. When he noticed she was awake, the expression shifted, became neutral again. "They're easier when they're sleeping," he said. "Everything's easier when it's sleeping." His mouth twitched, the start of something that on another face might have been a smile. He handed the babies back carefully, made sure Era had them secured before he let go. Then he stood stretched and looked out at the storm beyond their shelter. "I'm going to check the perimeter, make sure nothing's shifted. I'll be back in 10 minutes. He disappeared into the snow. Era sat with her daughters and listened to the wind and wondered what kind of man checked perimeters in a blizzard. What kind of training made that automatic? What kind of life made you think in terms of perimeters and security, even when you were just trying to survive a storm? He came back in 8 minutes, snow coating his shoulders and hair, brought more deadwood, started building up the supply along the edge of their shelter. "Storm should break tomorrow," he said. "Maybe late tonight, hard to tell, but we're running low on easy wood. I'm going to make one more trip, get enough to last us through tomorrow. Should take maybe an hour." "That's a long time to be out in this." "I've been out in worse." "Probably true, but still. Be careful." Cade looked at her. Something flickered across his face, surprised perhaps that she'd said it. "I will." He left. This time with his pack. This time with purpose. Era sat alone with her daughters and tried not to count minutes. Tried not to imagine what happened if he didn't come back. If he got turned around in the storm, or fell, or got hurt. She pushed the thoughts away. Cade Brennan was not a man who got lost in storms. Was not a man who made mistakes that got him killed. He'd survived too much. Known too much. He'd come back. She believed that, had to believe that. He came back in 50 minutes, dragging a full pine tree behind him, branches intact, needles still green. He'd cut it at the base and hauled the whole thing back through the snow. "Pitch pine," he said, breathing harder than usual but not winded. "Burns hot, burns slow. This should get us through the next 2 days easy." He broke the tree down methodically. Stripped branches, cut them to size, stacked them in order by thickness. By the time he was done, they had enough wood to keep the fire going for 3 days minimum. Era watched him work and thought about the word capable, about what it meant to be someone who could walk into a crisis and just start solving problems, one after another, not because it was heroic, just because that's what needed doing, and he knew how to do it. That evening, second night, they talked more. Cade had made another cup of snow melt, was warming it over the fire. Era was nursing River, Donlin asleep in the crook of her other arm. "You said you were heading to Draven Hollow," Era said. "For inspection. What does that mean? What are you inspecting?" Cade handed her the warm cup, waited for her to drink before answering. "Charter compliance mostly. Making sure councils are following the agreements their communities signed when they joined the Hollow network. Making sure disputes are being handled fairly. Making sure no one's being abused or exploited. Making sure the books balance and resources are being distributed according to population. And if they're not, if a council isn't compliant, Then I file a report with the Inter-Community Council. They investigate. If the violations are serious enough, they can remove council members, strip their authority. In extreme cases, they can dissolve a council entirely and place the community under external management until new elections can be held. Era thought about that. About Gareth Drummond's authority being stripped. About someone from outside coming in to run Draven Hollow. About how much Gareth would hate that. How much the whole community would resist. Has that ever happened, a council being dissolved? Twice in my 12 years as marshal. Both times for financial corruption. Councils skimming resources. Selling community property for personal gain. The kind of thing that couldn't be ignored. What about other violations, smaller ones? Cade looked at her steadily. Depends what you mean by smaller. Era looked down at River, at her small face, at the way her mouth worked even in sleep. Practicing the motions she'd need for survival. Putting a pregnant woman in a structure that collapses in a storm. Is that small, Ty? No, Cade said flatly. That's not small. That's criminal negligence at minimum. Attempted manslaughter if I wanted to push it. Will you push it? Cade was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Outside the wind howled, but it sounded farther away now, like maybe the storm was finally starting to lose its grip. That depends, Cade said finally. On what? On what you want. This is your life, your community. I can file charges, can force an investigation, but that investigation affects everyone in Draven Hollow, changes how the community functions, changes power structures, makes enemies. You'd have to live with the consequences of that long after I've moved on to the next hollow on my route. He paused. Let that settle. So, I'm asking, what do you want, justice, revenge, just to be left alone? You tell me what you need and I'll do what I can to make that happen, but I need to know what we're aiming for here. Era had never been asked that before. What she wanted, what she needed. Her whole life had been about adjusting to what other people decided, what the council decided, what the community decided, what tradition decided. No one had ever asked her to decide. She looked at Donlin and River, both of them asleep now, both of them breathing, both of them alive because this man had decided their lives mattered more than convenience, more than tradition, more than the storm. I want them to be safe, she said. I want a place to raise them where they're not punished for how they were born, where they have a chance. That's what I want. Whatever it takes to get that, I want that. Cade nodded slowly. All right, then that's what we'll aim for. Can you do that? Can the Ridge Marshal just declare I get to stay, that they have to accept me? The Ridge Marshal can declare a lot of things. Whether they stick depends on how willing I am to follow through, and how much political capital I'm willing to spend making it happen. And are you willing? Cade looked at her across the fire. His eyes were dark in the firelight, steady, certain. Yes, he said simply, I am. Era did not know what to do with that. With the idea that this stranger was willing to spend his authority, his political capital, whatever that meant on her. On 2 babies he delivered in a storm. On a situation that wasn't his problem and didn't have to be his concern. Why, she asked. The same question she'd asked the first night, but deeper now, more urgent. Why do you care? You don't know me, don't know them. You could have walked past us in the storm, could have decided it wasn't your business. Why didn't you? Cade was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Era thought maybe he wasn't going to answer, that maybe some questions didn't have answers or the answers were too complicated to explain. Then he spoke. 10 years ago, I found a woman in a cabin up near the Kentucky line. She'd been there 3 days. Her husband had beaten her, broken her arm, 3 ribs, locked her in the cabin and told her if she tried to leave, he'd kill her. Then he'd gone into town, left her there. When I found her, she was half-starved, dehydrated, infection setting in on the broken arm. He paused, added wood to the fire. I got her out, got her medical attention, filed charges. Her husband was arrested, sentenced to 5 years. She moved to a different community, started over. Last I heard, she'd remarried, had kids, was doing fine. Another pause. But before I found her, before I happened to be passing through that hollow and decided to check the outlying cabin, she was in that room for 3 days. 3 days where anyone could have helped. Anyone could have checked. The neighbors knew something was wrong. The local council knew her husband had a temper. But nobody did anything. Nobody wanted to get involved. Wasn't their business. He looked at Era directly. I decided then that when I saw something wrong, when I saw someone who needed help, it became my business. Whether I knew them or not. Whether it was convenient or not. Because the alternative it is walking past is deciding that someone else's suffering isn't worth the inconvenience. And I can't do that, won't do that. He said it quietly, matter-of-factly, like he was describing a simple fact about himself. Like this was just who he was, and there wasn't any choice involved. Ira felt her throat tighten, felt something in her chest not breaking but loosening. Something that had been tight and guarded for 28 years, letting go just slightly. Not all the way, not even close, but enough that she could feel it. That woman you saved, did you ever see her again? After once, maybe 2 years later, ran into her at a community gathering. She had a baby with her. New husband seemed decent. She looked happy. She thanked me. I told her the same thing I'm going to tell you. What's that? Don't thank me for doing what should have been done. Thank yourself for surviving long enough that someone could help. Era looked down at her daughters, at Dawnlin with her fierce small face, at River with her quiet watchful eyes. They survived, she said quietly. We all survived. Cade nodded. Yes, you did. The third day the storm broke, not all at once. Gradually, the wind died down first. Then the snow thinned from heavy to light to occasional flakes. By mid-morning, the sky had started to lighten. Not blue, still heavy gray, but lighter, brighter. By noon, they could see more than 20 feet in any direction. Cade stood at the edge of their shelter, looking out at the transformed landscape. Everything was white. The snow had to be 5 feet deep in places, maybe more. The world had been erased and rewritten in a single color. We can move tomorrow, he said. Today we rest. Tomorrow morning we head to Draven Hollow. It's 2 miles. Should take us maybe 2 hours going slow. You think you can manage that? Ira tested her legs, stood up carefully. Her body protested, but she could move, could walk, would have to walk. I can manage. Good. We'll take it slow. Stop when you need to. No rush. He spent the rest of that third day preparing. Repacking his gear, making a carrier for the babies from his spare coat and some rope, testing it to make sure it would hold, making Era practice wearing it, adjusting the weight distribution. By evening, everything was ready. They'd leave at first light, reach Draven Hollow by mid-morning. That night, third night, they sat by the fire one last time, the babies asleep between them. The storm finally truly over. When we get there, Cade said, to Draven Hollow, you let me talk first. Let me handle the council. They're going to have questions, going to have opinions. Don't engage, just stay quiet. Let me do what I need to do. And what do you need to do? Make sure they understand what happened here, what they did, and what's going to happen next. Era nodded. She trusted him. Didn't know when that had happened. Sometime between him delivering her daughters and building this shelter and sitting a watch for 3 days. Somewhere in there, she'd started trusting him, started believing that when he said he'd handle something, he would. Cade, she said quietly. Yeah. After tomorrow, after you talk to the council and I'm settled back in the hollow, you'll leave, won't you? Move on to the next community. That's how the rotation works. That's how it works. When will you come back? 6 weeks, standard inspection cycle. 6 weeks, a month and a half. It felt like a long time. Felt like forever when you measured it against 3 days that had felt like a lifetime. Will things be different by then? After you leave, will they really accept me, accept Dawnlin and River? Cade looked at her across the fire. I don't know, he said honestly. I can make them restore your status, can make them give you proper shelter, can make sure you're safe, but I can't make them welcome you, can't make them kind. That part that's on them and on you, on me, on whether you decide you still want to be part of a community that did this to you, whether you can forgive them, whether they're worth forgiving. Era thought about that, about Draven Hollow, about the people she'd known her whole life who'd watched her be pushed to the margins and hadn't objected, who'd let the council place her in a death trap and called it justice. I don't know if I can forgive them, she said quietly. Then don't, Cade said simply. Forgiveness isn't mandatory. You can be in a place without forgiving it, can raise your daughters there without pretending the past didn't happen. You just have to decide if staying is worth the qualm, and only you can make that calculation. Era held her daughters closer. Dawnlin stirred slightly, but didn't wake. River was perfectly still, perfectly peaceful. I'll think about it, she said. Good. They sat in silence for a while. The fire burned low. The night was cold but clear. Above them, through a gap in the trees, Era could see stars for the first time in days. Hundreds of them. Thousands maybe. Sharp and bright and impossibly far away. Cade, she said again. Yeah. These 3 days, this shelter, the fire, everything you did. I know you said not to thank you, but I'm going to anyway, because you didn't just save our lives, you gave us time. Time to be together. Time to be safe. Time to just exist without someone judging us for it. That's worth more than you know. Kay didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked at the fire, at the stars, at something Era couldn't see. You're welcome, he said finally. Quiet, almost too quiet to hear. Then he stood, checked the fire one last time, made sure the babies were warm, settled into his spot with his back against a tree. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Era lay down with her daughters against her chest, closed her eyes, listened to the fire crackle and the night sounds of the forest and Cade's steady breathing on the other side of the shelter. Tomorrow they'd walk back into the world, back into Draven Hollow and everything that waited there. The council, the community, the judgment and the questions and the consequences of 3 days that shouldn't have happened but did. But tonight they were here, safe, warm, alive. All four of them, and that Era thought as sleep pulled her down was enough. For now it was enough. They left at first light. The world beyond the hemlock grove was unrecognizable. Snow had buried the landscape under 5 feet of white that caught the early sun and threw it back in a glare so bright, Era had to squint against it. The trail Cade said led back to Draven Hollow was completely gone, erased. They were navigating by landmarks now, by the shape of distant ridges and the placement of rock formations that rose above the snow like islands in a frozen sea. Cade went first, breaking trail. Each step sank him knee-deep into powder that hadn't been touched since it fell. He moved steadily, but not fast, testing each footfall before committing his weight. Behind him, Era followed in the trench. His boots created the babies strapped against her chest in the carrier he'd fashioned. Donlin was awake and fussy, making small complaining sounds that weren't quite cries but weren't silence either. River was asleep, her small face tucked against Era's collarbone, oblivious to the cold and the movement and the fact that they were walking through a wilderness that had tried to kill them 3 days ago. The going was slow, slower than Kate had estimated. The snow was deeper than it had looked from the shelter. Heavier, wetter, spring snow that wanted to melt but hadn't yet. The kind that stuck to everything and made each step feel like you were pulling your boots out of mud. They stopped 3 times in the first hour. Once so Era could catch her breath. Once so Cade could adjust the carrier that was digging into her shoulders. Once so she could nurse Donlin, who'd gone from fussy to actively crying. Cade stood watch while she nursed, his back to her, his eyes scanning the tree line, looking for what Era didn't know. They were alone out here, had been alone for 3 days. But he watched anyway, like watching was just what he did. Like vigilance was a reflex he couldn't turn off even when there was nothing to be vigilant about. When Donlin was fed and settled, they started again. The second hour was harder than the first. Era's legs were burning. Her back ached from the weight of the carrier and the babies. Her feet were cold despite the extra socks Kate had given her from his pack. Everything hurt in that deep grinding way that said her body was past tired and running on something else now. Something that would cost her later but was keeping her moving now. Cade must have sensed it. He slowed his pace even more, started calling out encouragement without turning around. Halfway there. Doing good. Another mile, maybe less. She didn't respond, couldn't spare the breath, just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Kept following the trench he was cutting through the snow. Kept her hands wrapped around the carrier, holding Donlin and River against her, feeling their small bodies warm and alive, and depending on her to get them somewhere safe. She could do this. Would do this. The alternative was stopping. And stopping out here in this cold with these babies wasn't an option. They crested a rise and suddenly the valley opened up below them. Draven Hollow spread out across the floor of it, maybe 200 yards down the slope. The communal fire was visible, even from here, a column of smoke rising straight up into the still morning air. The stone cabins clustered around it like children around their mother, waiting for warmth, waiting for safety. Era had lived in Draven Hollow her whole life, had never left it for more than a few days at a time, had never wanted to leave it because this was home. This was all she knew. Looking at it now from the outside, from the ridge above it, with 2 babies against her chest and a stranger who'd saved her life, walking point ahead of her, she felt nothing. The smoke from the communal fire carried the scent of pine and old snow. Familiar, distant, like a memory that belonged to someone else. No warmth, no sense of homecoming. Just a flat, exhausted acknowledgement that this was where they were going. This was what happened next. There it is, Kate said. He'd stopped at the crest of the ridge, was looking down at the settlement with an expression Era couldn't quite read. Assessment, maybe. Calculation. You ready? No, Era said honestly. Good. People who think they're ready for confrontation usually aren't. People who know they're not ready, they pay attention. Stay sharp. That's what I need you to do. Stay sharp. Stay quiet. Let me handle this. What if they don't listen? What if Gareth refuses? Cade looked at her. His eyes were hard, flat, the same expression she'd seen when she first told him about the council's decision 3 days ago. Then Gareth finds out what happens when Ridge Marshals stop asking and start enforcing. Come on, let's get this done. He started down the slope. Era followed. They reached the boundary stone at mid-morning, the carved marker that designated where Draven Hollow's claimed territory began and the wild land ended. Someone had cleared the snow from around it recently. Probably this morning. Probably as soon as the storm broke and people could get outside to start assessing damage. A few people were out. Era could see them moving between cabins, checking roofs, clearing paths, doing the work that always came after a big storm. Normal work, ordinary work. The kind of work that said life goes on and yesterday's crisis is today's chore. No one had noticed them yet. They were still 50 yards from the nearest cabin, still outside the boundary. Cade stopped at the stone, set down his pack, pulled out a canteen and handed it to Era. Drink, then wait here. You're going in alone. I'm going to announce myself. Give them time to gather. You coming in with me right away, that gives them something to react to before I've established control of the situation. Better if I go first, get them assembled, then bring you in when I'm ready. It made sense tactically. Era could see the logic. But standing here at the boundary stone while Cade walked into her community to confront her council felt wrong. Felt like hiding. I should be there. They're going to talk about me anyway. I should face them. You will, Cade said. But on my terms, not theirs. Trust me on this. Era looked at him, at this man who'd spent 3 days keeping her alive, who'd asked for nothing in return, who was about to walk into a hostile situation on her behalf. She trusted him. Didn't have much choice at this point. But more than that, she believed him. Believed he knew what he was doing. Believed he'd done this before and knew how to handle it. All right, she said. Wait. Cade nodded, adjusted the badge on his chest so it was clearly visible, checked that his coat was open enough that anyone looking would see it immediately. Then he looked at her one more time. 30 minutes, maybe less. I'll come back for you. Don't come in on your own. Wait for me. I'll wait. He walked toward the settlement, steady, unhurried, his boots crunching in the snow, his shoulders squared. Everything about his posture said authority, said this was a man who expected to be listened to and had the power to enforce that expectation. Era watched him go, watched him reach the first cabin, watched someone looked like Marcus Webb, one of the older men, spot him and stop working. Say something. Point toward the communal lodge. Cade nodded, said something back. Kept walking. By the time he reached the center of the settlement, a small crowd had formed, maybe 15 people. Word traveled fast in a place this size. Ridge Marshal on site. Everyone wanted to see. Everyone wanted to know why. Era couldn't hear what was being said, was too far away, but she could see Cade talking to someone, Gareth, probably from the way the man stood. Tall, rigid, defensive even from a distance. The conversation lasted maybe 3 minutes. Then Gareth turned and walked toward the communal lodge. The crowd followed. Cade stood in the center of the settlement and waited. Era counted minutes, tried to keep Donlin quiet, tried not to think about what was being said in that lodge right now, tried not to imagine Gareth's face when Cade told him what had happened, what they'd found, what came next. 22 minutes after Cade had left her at the boundary stone, she saw him emerge from the lodge, saw him scan the settlement, saw him look back toward where she was standing. He raised one hand, the signal they'd agreed on. Come now. Era adjusted the carrier, made sure both babies were secure, took one deep breath that did nothing to steady her nerves. Then she started walking. The settlement had changed since she'd left it 3 days ago. Or maybe she'd changed. Maybe she was seeing it differently now. The cabins looked smaller than she remembered. The paths narrower. The whole place felt contained in a way it never had before, like she'd been living inside a box and hadn't noticed until she'd stepped outside it. People were watching her. She could feel their eyes, could see some of them standing in doorways or beside cleared paths, watching her walk through the settlement with 2 babies strapped to her chest and snow soaking through her boots. No one said anything. No one came forward. They just watched. Era kept her eyes forward, kept walking. Followed Cade's tracks to the communal lodge, where he stood waiting at the entrance. When she reached him, he looked at her face, read something there, nodded once. They're all inside, full council plus about 60 community members. It's going to be loud, might get hostile. You stay behind me, don't engage, don't defend yourself. That's my job today. Understand? I understand. All right, let's go. He pushed open the door. The communal lodge was packed, every bench filled, people standing along the walls. The council sat at the front, 5 men, 3 women, all of them older than 50, all of them wearing the dark wool that marked them as elders. Gareth Drummond sat in the center, tall, gray-bearded, his face arranged in an expression that was probably meant to look neutral, but came across as barely contained anger. The room went silent when Era walked in behind Cade. Every eye turned to her, to the babies, to the man in front of her with the Ridge Marshal badge on his chest. Cade let the silence hold for a few seconds. Let them look. Let them process. Then he spoke. My name is Cade Brennan. I'm Ridge Marshal for this sector. I was en route to Draven Hollow for standard inspection when I was delayed by the storm. During that delay, I came across Era Thorne in active labor, alone embarked in open forest, in conditions that should have killed her and her children. He paused, let that sink in. She informed me that this council had placed her in an outer structure 3 weeks prior. That structure collapsed under snow weight on the first night of the storm. She was forced to seek shelter in the forest where she gave birth to twin daughters. Both children survived. So did she. No thanks to this council. Another pause. The room was absolutely silent. Era could hear her own breathing, could hear Donlin making small sounds against her chest. I'm here to inform this council that Era Thorne's status is hereby restored. She will be provided adequate housing within the main settlement. She will be provided the same access to community resources as any other member. And her daughters will be recognized as members of this community with all the rights that entails. Gareth stood. His face was red, his jaw tight. Marshal Brennan, with respect, this is an internal matter. The council made a decision regarding Era Thorne based on our community's bonding laws. Laws that predate the Ridge Marshal Charter. Laws that don't supersede the basic obligation to not let pregnant women freeze to death. Cade cut him off. His voice was flat, hard. I've read your bonding laws, Elder Drummond. Read them on my way here. Every community in this network has some version of them. None of them, not one, includes provisions for placing women in structures that can't withstand winter storms. That's not tradition, that's negligence. The outer cabin was adequate for... The outer cabin collapsed. Era Thorne walked into a blizzard in active labor because staying in the structure you provided would have killed her. Are you seriously going to stand there and defend that decision? The room was so quiet, Era could hear wood settling in the fire at the far end of the lodge. Garrett's mouth worked. He looked like he wanted to argue, looked like he had a dozen responses lined up. But something in Cade's face and the flat, hard certainty of his stance made him pause. The council will need to discuss, Gareth started. There's nothing to discuss, Cade said. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to inform you of what's happening. Era Thorne's status is restored. She and her daughters will be housed appropriately. This is not a request. This is an order backed by Ridge Marshal Authority. If you'd like to challenge that authority, you're welcome to file a complaint with the Intercommunity Council. They'll review it in approximately 6 months. Until then, my order stands. Are we clear? Gareth looked around the room, looking for support, looking for someone to back him. The other council members were silent, staring at their hands or the floor or anywhere except at Gareth. Are we clear, Elder Drummond? Cade repeated. Quieter this time. More dangerous. Yes, Gareth said finally. Bit off, forced. We're clear. Good. Now, show me which cabins are available for immediate occupancy. One of the other council members, a woman named Hollis, who'd always been quieter than Gareth, less rigid, stood up. The Carrick cabin is vacant, has been since old Thomas passed last spring. It's small but solid, near the center, close to the communal fire. Cade looked at Era. That work, Era knew the Carrick cabin. Knew it was better than where she'd been before. Better than the outer structure by a mile. Small, yes, but weather-tight. Warm. Close enough to the center that she wouldn't be isolated. That works, she said, her first words since entering the lodge. They came out quieter than she'd intended. But they came out. Then that's settled, Cade said. Era Thorne takes the Carrick cabin effective immediately. I'll inspect it before I leave to ensure it meets minimum standards. If anyone has objections to this arrangement, you can address them to me. Not to Era, not to anyone else. To me. Understood. Silence. No one objected. No one moved. Good. This council session is concluded. Everyone back to your business. People started filing out, slowly, quietly, shooting looks at Era as they passed. Some looked sympathetic, some looked uncomfortable, some looked angry. But no one said anything. No one stopped. Within 3 minutes, the lodge was empty except for Era, Cade, and the council. Gareth stood there looking at Cade with barely suppressed rage. You can't just walk into a community and overturn council decisions. I just did, Cade said. And if you have a problem with that, like I said, file a complaint. But I'll tell you right now how that complaint is going to go. The Inter-Community Council is going to read my report. They're going to see that a pregnant woman was placed in inadequate shelter during a record storm. They're going to see that she nearly died. They're going to see that 2 infants nearly died. And then they're going to ask you why you thought that was acceptable. And you're going to have to explain to them that it was about bloodline purity and bonding law. And they're going to ask you if bloodline purity is worth more than human life. And you're going to have to answer that question in front of 14 other community councils. So go ahead, file that complaint. I'd love to see how that conversation goes. Gareth said nothing. His face was dark red now, hands clenched at his sides. We're done here, Cade said. Elder Hollis, if you'd show us to the Carrot cabin. Hollis nodded, looked relieved to have an excuse to leave. This way. They followed her out of the lodge, into the cold morning air, across the settlement to a small cabin on the eastern side of the communal fire. Stone foundation, log walls, solid door with good hinges, chimney that looked recently repaired. Hollis unlocked the door, stepped inside. Era and Cade followed. The interior was sparse but clean. One room, maybe 15 by 15 feet, stone fireplace on the north wall, sleeping platform on the east, small table and 2 chairs, shelves along the west wall, window with shutters that actually closed. Compared to where Era had been living 3 weeks ago, it looked like luxury. Fire's laid, Hollis said, gesturing to the hearth. Just needs lighting. There's basic supplies in the chest, blankets, some dried food. Water bucket needs filling, but the well's just outside. She looked at Era directly for the first time. Her face was hard to read. Not hostile, not warm, something in between. I'm sorry, Hollis said quietly. About the outer cabin, about... She gestured vaguely. All of it. Some of us voted against moving you. We were outvoted, but we should have fought harder. I should have fought harder. Era didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if an apology 3 weeks late and 3 days after she'd nearly died meant anything or not. Thank you, she said finally, because what else was there to say? Hollis nodded, looked at the babies. They're beautiful, both of them. I hope they thrive here. Then she left, closed the door behind her. Left Era and Cade alone in the cabin. Cade moved immediately to the hearth, lit the fire with the same efficiency he did everything. Within 5 minutes, there was warmth starting to fill the small space. Era stood in the center of the room holding Donlin and River and tried to process what had just happened. Tried to understand that this cabin was hers now, that she was back in the settlement, that the council had been forced to accept her, that Cade had done exactly what he said he'd do. You should sit, Cade said, not looking at her, adjusting logs in the fire. You've been on your feet for 3 hours. Your body needs rest. Era sat on the sleeping platform. The furs there were old but thick, warm. She carefully removed the carrier and laid both babies beside her. Donlin immediately started rooting around. Hungry again. River slept on. Cade finished with the fire, stood, looked around the cabin with that same assessing gaze he turned on everything. It'll do, he said. It's solid, warm, central. You'll be safe here. For how long? Cade looked at her. What do you mean? How long will I be safe? You're leaving. Today, probably. Tomorrow at latest. And then it's just me and Gareth Drummond and a community that spent 3 weeks treating me like I didn't exist. How long until they decide your authority doesn't matter, that they can put me right back where I was? Cade crossed his arms, leaned against the wall. They won't. You can't know that. I can, because I'm going to make it very clear before I leave that this situation is being monitored, that I'll be back in 6 weeks for follow-up inspection, that if anything happens to you or your daughters in that time, there will be consequences that make today's conversation look friendly. And what about after 6 weeks? What about 3 months from now? 6 months, you can't stay here forever. No, Kate agreed, I can't. But I can establish enough oversight that Gareth Drummond thinks twice before making your life difficult. I can put enough scrutiny on this community that they understand crossing you means crossing me. And I can make sure you have resources, people like Hollis, who feel guilty enough about what happened that they'll look out for you. It's not perfect, but it's what I can do. Era looked down at Donlin, who was nursing now, at River, who was starting to wake up, at these two small lives that depended entirely on her to keep them safe. What if it's not enough? She asked quietly. Cade pushed off the wall, walked over to where she sat, knelt down so he was at eye level with her. Then you send word. You get a message to the Ridge Marshal Station. And I come back. I don't care what rotation I'm on or where I'm supposed to be. You need help, I come back. That's a promise. Era looked at him, at his dark eyes, at the seriousness in his face, at the absolute certainty with which he said it. Why, she asked. Not for the first time, but needing to hear the answer again, needing to understand why this man cared so much about someone he'd known for 3 days. Cade was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she didn't expect. Because 3 days ago, I watched you face the worst thing that can happen to a person, and you didn't break. You brought 2 lives into the world in a blizzard, and you held on and you survived. That's not common. That kind of strength, that kind of refusal to quit, the world needs more people like that, not less. So yeah, I'm going to make sure you and your daughters get a fair chance because you've already proven you'll make the most of it. He said it simply, like it was just a fact, like there was no other way to see it. Era felt her throat tighten, felt her eyes burn. She blinked hard. This wasn't the time to cry. Wasn't the time to fall apart. Thank you, she managed. You keep saying that. You keep earning it. Cade stood, walked back to the fire. I'm going to stay in Draven for 2 more days. Make sure you're settled. Make sure the council understands the situation. Then I have to move on. Next community on the rotation. But like I said, 6 weeks, I'll be back. And in the meantime, if you need anything, you send word. How do I send word if you're 3 communities away? There's a relay system. Every community has a messenger who carries priority communications between settlements. You tell them it's for Ridge Marshal. They'll get it to me within 48 hours. I'll include you in that system before I leave. He said it like it was already done, like he'd already thought through every contingency and had solutions ready. Era wondered if that's what 12 years as Ridge Marshal did to you. Made you think in systems and protocols and backup plans. Made you unable to just react. Made you always 3 steps ahead. What about you, she asked. Do you have anyone checking on you? Anyone you send word to if you need help? Cade looked surprised by the question, like it hadn't occurred to him that he might need help, that he might be someone worth checking on. I manage, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got. Era looked at him, really looked, saw the tiredness around his eyes that 3 days of no sleep had put there. Saw the way he held himself, always alert, always ready, never fully relaxed. Saw a man who'd spent so long taking care of other people that he'd forgotten anyone might want to take care of him. Then let me give you a better one, Era said. 6 weeks, when you come back for inspection. You check on me, I check on you. We make sure we're both still standing. Deal? Cade stared at her. Something moved behind his eyes, surprise maybe, or something deeper that he wasn't ready to name. Deal, he said quietly. Outside, the settlement was coming back to life. Era could hear voices, footsteps, the ordinary sounds of people going about their business. The storm was over. Life was resuming. But inside this small cabin with the fire burning and 2 babies sleeping and a promise made between 2 people who'd survived something impossible together, something else was beginning. Something that didn't have a name yet, something that would take time to understand. But it was there, real, undeniable. Cade checked his watch. It's nearly noon. You should eat. Rest. I'll bring food from the communal stores. Make sure you're set for the next few days. You don't have to do that. I know, I'm going to anyway. He moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the latch, looked back at her. Era, you did good these 3 days. You kept yourself together, kept your daughters alive. Walked 2 miles through snow when most people couldn't have walked 200 feet. I meant what I said in the lodge. You're stronger than they know. Don't let them make you forget that. Then he was gone, door closing behind him, leaving Era alone in the cabin with Donlin and River. She looked around the space, her space now, by order of the Ridge Marshal, protected by his authority, safe because he'd made it so. She didn't know what came next. Didn't know if Draven Hollow would ever truly accept her. Didn't know if raising her daughters here was the right choice or just the only choice available. But she knew this: she'd survived. Her daughters had survived. And somewhere in the mountains there was a man who'd keep his word to come back, to check on her, to make sure she was still standing. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Cade stayed 2 days as promised. 2 days of making sure Era had everything she needed. 2 days of making it abundantly clear to Gareth Drummond and the rest of the council that Era Thorne was under Ridge Marshal protection, and any action taken against her would be considered a personal affront. On the morning of the third day, he packed his gear, stood in the doorway of the Carrick cabin one last time, looked at Era holding River while Donlin slept in a makeshift cradle he'd helped her build from spare wood. 6 weeks, he said. 6 weeks, Era repeated. He nodded once and walked away across the settlement or toward the ridge on trail. Didn't look back. That wasn't his way. Era watched until he disappeared over the rise. Then she closed the door and turned to face her new life in Draven Hollow. The first week was hardest. People didn't know how to act around her. They'd spent 3 weeks treating her like she was invisible. Now the Ridge Marshal had made it clear she wasn't just visible, she was protected. Untouchable in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. Some people nodded when they passed her. Awkward, uncertain. Some looked away entirely, pretended they didn't see her. Gareth Drummond was in that second category. He'd walk past the Carrick cabin twice a day and never once acknowledge her existence. But no one was hostile. No one said anything cruel. No one tried to undermine Cade's order. Whether that was respect for his authority or fear of his return, Era didn't know. Didn't particularly care. The result was the same. She was safe. Her daughters were safe. That was what mattered. Hollis checked on her every few days, brought extra food from the communal stores, asked if the cabin was warm enough, if the babies were thriving. She didn't stay long, didn't try to become friends, just fulfilled whatever sense of obligation was driving her, and then left. Era accepted the help, didn't turn it away. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not with 2 infants to feed in a winter that wasn't quite finished yet. Donlin grew fast. By the second week, she was noticeably bigger, louder, more demanding. She'd cry when she was hungry and didn't stop until she was fed. River remained quiet, watchful. She'd nurse when offered, but never demanded. Just waited patiently for her turn. Era loved them both with a fierceness that surprised her. Had never imagined she could feel this way about anyone. This protective. This willing to do violence if it meant keeping them safe. She thought about Cade constantly, wondered where he was, which community he was inspecting, whether he was warm, whether he was eating enough, whether he thought about them at all, or if 3 days in a storm had already faded into just another incident in 12 years of incidents. She told herself it didn't matter. Told herself he was coming back because it was his job, not because of anything personal. Told herself not to read meaning into promises made by a man whose entire life was built on duty and obligation. But she thought about him anyway. Then on the morning of the 14th day, something shifted. Era woke to urgent knocking. Opened the door to find Hollis' face-pale breath coming fast. Emergency council session. Gareth found a technicality in the charter. Says Cade's order only applies if you remain a productive member of community. He's claiming you haven't contributed enough since you returned. Era's blood went cold. She'd been recovering, nursing twins. But Gareth didn't care about that. He'd been waiting, watching, looking for any opening. When tonight, sunset, Hollis hesitated. Some of us will vote for you, but Gareth's been working the council. I don't know if we have the numbers. After Hollis left, Era looked at Donlin and River, both sleeping, both unaware that their place in this community, their right to exist here, was about to be challenged again. She thought about the hemlock tree, about pressing her back against its bark and thinking, keep them alive, keep them alive, keep them alive. She'd kept them alive then. She'd keep them alive now. That evening, Era walked into the communal lodge carrying both babies. The council was assembled. Gareth sat at center looking satisfied, like a hunter who'd finally cornered his prey. Era Thorne, he began. It has come to our attention that in the 2 weeks since the Ridge Marshal restored your status, you have contributed nothing to community labor. No gathering, no processing. No. I've been recovering from giving birth in a blizzard, Era cut in, her voice steady, while you sat warm by your fire. Murmurs through the room. Gareth's face reddened. The charter is clear. The charter, Era said louder now, says nothing about immediate contribution requirements for new mothers. I helped draft the medical provisions 12 years ago, when my mother was still alive. Section 7, Clause 3. Members recovering from childbirth are exempt from labor obligations for 6 weeks minimum. Would you like me to recite the rest? Silence. Gareth's mouth worked, but no sound came out. Hollis stood. She's right. The provision exists. I move we dismiss this session as groundless. Seconded, said another elder. Vote 5-3 in Era's favor. Gareth sat frozen as Era walked out head-high, babies against her chest. She'd done it, defended herself, without Cade, without anyone. And it felt like breathing for the first time in 28 years. The weeks crawled by. 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Winter started loosening its grip. The snow began to melt. The creek that had been frozen solid started flowing again. Birds returned to the ridge. The world remembered it was supposed to be alive. On the morning that marked exactly 6 weeks since Cade had left, Era woke before dawn, checked the babies, fed them, then sat by the window and watched the trail from the ridge. She told herself she wasn't waiting, told herself she was just enjoying the morning. But she was waiting, had been waiting for 6 weeks. He came at mid-morning. She saw him crest the rise, saw that familiar shape, that steady, unhurried walk. He was carrying his pack and his coat was open despite the chill, and everything about him said he'd walk through the night to get here on time. Her heart did something complicated in her chest, something she didn't want to examine too closely. She opened the cabin door before he could knock. Cade stopped 3 feet away, looked at her. His eyes moved from her face to the cabin behind her to the baby she was holding, taking inventory, assessing. You're still standing, he said. So are you. Something passed through his face. Relief, perhaps. Can I come in? Era stepped aside. Cade entered the cabin, set his pack down, looked around the space with that same careful attention he'd given it 6 weeks ago, checking what had changed. What was the same? You've made it home, he said, not a question, an observation. Era looked around, at the shelves she'd organized, at the cradle Cade had helped her build that now held both babies when they slept, at the dried herbs hanging near the fire, at the small touches that made this place hers. I've made it livable, she corrected. Cade nodded, understood the distinction. How have they treated you? Carefully at first. Then Gareth tried to use a charter technicality to revoke your order. I stopped him. Cade's head snapped toward her. What? Era told him. About the emergency session. About the charter provision. About defending herself. When she finished, Cade was staring at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Pride, maybe, or something deeper. You didn't need me, he said quietly. I did need you. You gave me the space to find my footing. But you're right, I can stand on my own now. Cade moved to the cradle, looked down at Donlin and River. They've grown. 3 pounds each, maybe more. Donlin eats like she's trying to catch up to lost time. River's more patient about it. Cade's mouth twitched, the start of something that might have been a smile. Sounds like them? The fact that he remembered their personalities, that he could identify them after 6 weeks made Era's throat tighten. How long are you here? She asked. 3 days, standard inspection. Then I move on. 3 days. It felt like nothing and forever at the same time. You look tired, Era said. Cade shrugged. Long winter, a lot of ground to cover. When's the last time you slept, really slept? I sleep. That's not an answer. Cade looked at her. That same surprise from 6 weeks ago, like he wasn't used to anyone caring whether he slept or ate or took care of himself. I manage, he said again. Still not an answer. Era gestured to the sleeping platform. You're staying here. This inspection cycle. There's room. And before you argue, I owe you. Let me repay at least some of it. You don't owe me anything. Then let me do it anyway, please. Cade studied her face. Whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. All right, 3 days, then I'm back on rotation. 3 days, Era agreed. Those 3 days established a pattern that would repeat over the next year. Cade would arrive every 6 weeks, would inspect the community, would check on Era and the babies, would stay in the Carrick cabin because Era had made it clear that was non-negotiable. And somewhere in those 3 days, they'd sit by the fire after the babies were asleep and talk. Not about anything profound, just talk. About the communities he'd visited, about the people in Draven Hollow, about how Donlin was starting to roll over, about how River had smiled for the first time. Normal talk, easy talk. The kind of talk that happened between two people who'd survived something terrible together and had decided without ever saying it directly that they wanted to keep surviving together. The seasons changed. Spring became summer. Summer became fall. Fall became winter again. A full year passed. Dawnlin learned to crawl, then to walk, then to run. She was fearless, would charge at the world like she expected it to move out of her way. Usually it did. River learned to observe, to wait, to move when no one was watching. She was the one who figured out how to open the cabin door, the one who found the loose board in the floor where Era kept things she didn't want found, the quiet one who saw everything. Era built a life, not the life she'd imagined, but a life. She gathered herbs, helped with harvests, slowly, very slowly earned a place in the community that was based on what she did rather than what she'd done wrong. And every 6 weeks, Cade came back. Every 6 weeks, they had those 3 days. Every 6 weeks, the thing between them that didn't have a name got a little bit stronger, a little bit harder to ignore. It was spring again, 14 months since that night in the blizzard. Cade had just arrived for his inspection cycle, was sitting by the fire watching Dawnlin try to stack wooden blocks while River systematically knocked them down from the other side. They work together, Cade observed, even when it doesn't look like it. They have since the beginning, Era said. Dawnlin charges forward. River watches her back. It's like they planned it. Maybe they did, Era smiled, sat down across from him. The babies were occupied. It was one of those rare moments of quiet that happened maybe twice a day if she was lucky. Cade, she said, yeah, you said once that Ridge Marshals have to choose mates through council approval, that every woman they presented to you was chosen for political alliance. He looked at her, careful, like he knew where this was going and wasn't sure he wanted to arrive there. That's true. Are they still presenting candidates? They are. And you're still refusing. Cade was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Dawnlin squealed as her tower fell again. River made a sound that might have been a laugh. Yes, Cade said finally. I'm still refusing. Why? He looked at her directly. Those dark, steady eyes that never lied. Never softened what he meant. Because I've already decided. And I'm waiting to see if she decides the same thing. The air in the cabin changed, became heavier, more charged. Era's heart was pounding hard enough she was sure he could hear it. What if she has, Era asked quietly, decided? What happens then? Then I go to the Inter-Community Council, and I tell them I'm choosing someone outside their approved candidates. And I cite the same charter clause that saved your life, the one that says, Ridge Marshal Authority supersedes local law in cases of necessity. And I argue that my effectiveness as marshal depends on having a partner I respect. Someone I trust, someone who understands what this work costs. And I force them to either approve it or remove me from position. They could remove you. They could, probably won't. Good marshals are hard to find. People who actually want this job are rarer. But they could. Era thought about that, about Cade risking his position, his authority, everything he'd built for 12 years. For her, for them. That's a lot to gamble, she said. It is, Cade agreed, but some things are worth gambling for. He was still looking at her, still waiting, still giving her room to decide. Era looked at her daughters, at Dawnlin, who was already trying to build her tower again, at River, who was watching Cade with those dark measuring eyes, at this life she'd built in Draven Hollow, alone, independent, safe. And she thought about 14 months of 6-week cycles, 14 months of 3-day visits, 14 months of careful distance that was really just fear dressed up as caution. She thought about the man who'd delivered her daughters in a blizzard, who'd fought a council for her, who came back every 6 weeks without fail to make sure she was still standing, who'd never once asked for anything except the chance to keep showing up. She thought about what her mother used to say before the sickness took her. That safety was important, but so was living. And sometimes those two things weren't the same. When's the next council session? Era asked. 3 months. Why, Mom? Because if you're going to make this argument, if you're going to risk your position, I want to be there. Want them to see my face when you tell them you're choosing me. Want them to understand this isn't about politics or duty. This is about two people who survived something impossible and decided they want to keep surviving it together. Cade stared at her. Recognition crossed his face. Relief, joy. Something too big to fit comfortably on a face that was used to staying controlled. You're sure? He asked. I'm sure. It won't be easy. The council won't just approve it. They'll make arguments. They'll pressure you. They'll suggest I'm taking advantage of the power imbalance. They'll do everything they can to make you doubt this decision. Then they'll fail, Era said simply. Because I don't doubt it. Do you, Bohm? No. Then we're done doubting. Cade crossed the space between them, knelt in front of where she sat, took her hands in his. His hands were rough, scarred from years in the mountains, warm, steady, real. Era Thorne, he said quietly, will you stand with me at council? Will you face whatever comes? Will you let me choose you the way I should have chosen you a year ago? Except I was too careful and too afraid of presuming and too convinced you deserve better than a man who's gone 3 weeks out of every 6. Yes, Era said. To all of it, yes. He pulled her forward, kissed her, careful at first, then deeper, like he'd been holding back for 14 months and couldn't anymore. When they broke apart, both breathing harder, Donlin was staring at them from her pile of blocks. River had crawled over and was tugging on Cade's coat. Cade picked up River, held her against his chest, looked at Donlin, who immediately demanded to be picked up too. He pulled her up with his other arm, held both girls, looked at Era over their small heads. 3 months, he said. Then we change everything. 3 months, Era agreed. The Inter-Community Council met in a lodge at the northern edge of the territory. 14 community leaders, 3 ridge marshals including Cade, and Era Thorne with Donlin and River. The room was packed. This kind of challenge hadn't happened in decades. Everyone wanted to see how it played out. Cade stood at the center. Era stood beside him. The baby sat on a blanket near the fire playing with wooden toys, watched over by Hollis, who'd come as witness, as support, as the one person from Draven Hollow who'd decided Era deserved an ally. Cade made his case, cited charter clauses, made arguments about effectiveness and trust in the necessity of choosing partners based on capability rather than politics. The council listened, asked questions, made objections, exactly like he'd predicted. Then one of the council members, an old woman named Petra, who'd been on the council longer than anyone could remember, spoke. Marshal Brennan, you argue that your effectiveness depends on having a partner you respect. That respect can't be engineered through political alliance. I don't disagree. But I want to hear from the woman, from Era Thorne. Why are you agreeing to this? You have safety in Draven Hollow now. Have status, have independence. Why tie yourself to a man who's gone more than he's present, who lives a life of constant travel and danger? What do you gain from this that you don't already have? Era stepped forward. She'd prepared for this question, had known it was coming. I gain a partner, she said, someone who understands what it costs to keep standing when everything says to fall. Someone who showed me that strength isn't about never needing help, it's about knowing when to accept it. Someone who delivered my daughters in a blizzard and then spent 14 months proving he meant it when he said he'd keep showing up. She paused, looked around the room, at all these community leaders who'd never met her, who only knew her as the subject of a dispute. You're right that I have safety now, that I have independence, but I don't have a partner, and I want one. Not because I need to be saved, but because I want to build something with someone who understands the weight of responsibility, who knows what it means to make hard choices, who won't flinch when things get difficult. She looked at Cade. That's him. That's why I'm choosing him. And if that's not political enough for this council, if that's too personal or too simple, then I'm sorry. But it's the truth. Petra studied her for a long moment. Then something shifted in her weathered face. That's an honest answer. She turned to the other council members. But honesty doesn't solve our practical concerns. Marshal Brennan travels 3 weeks out of 6. What happens to Draven Hollow when he's gone? Does his wife speak for him? Does she gain Ridge Marshal authority by proxy? That's a dangerous precedent. Another council member, a hard-faced man named Torvin, leaned forward. I agree with Petra. This match creates confusion and chain of command. I vote against. 3 others nodded. The tide was turning. Cade stepped forward. Era speaks for herself, not for me. She has no Ridge Marshal authority. Then what's the point? Torvin interrupted. You're asking us to approve a match that weakens your position, makes you divided, makes you calm, human, Era cut in. Every eye turned to her. It makes him human, and that's exactly what you should want. A marshal who understands what it costs to have a family, to protect people you love, who won't make decisions that hurt families because it's just policy. You want someone who remembers what matters. The room went quiet. Petra leaned back in her chair. Studied them both with eyes that had seen 50 years of council politics. A gamble, she said quietly, but maybe the right one. She looked around the table. I moved to approve. Those in favor, hands rose slowly. 1, 2, 3. Era counted. 6, 7, 8. Those against, 5 hands. 6, 8 to 6. The sound of hands lowering echoed through the silent lodge. Somewhere outside, a bird called sharp and clear, cutting through the tension. Motion passes, Petra said. Marshal Brennan's choice is approved. Outside the lodge, Cade stopped, turned to Era. The babies were asleep now, one in each of their arms. You didn't have to defend me in there, he said. Yes, I did, because it was true. She shifted Donlin to her other hip, and because they needed to hear it from me, not you. Cade looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. We're going to figure this out. The travel, the time apart. We'll figure it out, Era finished. You've said that. I believe you. They walked in silence for a while. Hollis had fallen back, giving them space. The trail wound down through spring green forest. Birds called. Creek water rushed somewhere below. You ever regret it? Era asked quietly. Stopping that night, finding us. Cade stopped walking, looked at her with such intensity she almost stepped back. Every single day, he said. Era's heart dropped. I regret, Cade continued, voice rough, that I didn't find you sooner. That you spent 3 weeks in that outer cabin. That you had to walk into a storm alone. That part, I regret all of it. He reached out, touched Donlin's small hand. The baby grabbed his finger immediately. But finding you, delivering them, these 14 months. He shook his head. No, I don't regret a single moment of that. River stirred in Era's arms. Cade took her, shifting both girls so he held them the way he'd held them that second day in the grove, one in each arm, natural, like he'd been doing it all their lives. We're going to build something, he said, looking at Era over their daughters' heads. Something that doesn't fit the old patterns. Something people will point to and say, that's not how it's supposed to work. And we're going to do it anyway. Yes, Era said, we are. Above them, the spring sky stretched wide and clear. The mountains stood eternal and patient. The trail unwound ahead of them, leading back toward Draven Hollow and whatever came next. And 3 lives that had begun in winter, in cold and crisis and impossible odds, walked forward together. Not towards safety, not towards certainty, toward each other, which turned out to be the same thing.